In 1943, Winston Churchill sent a top-secret memo stamped with 3 words, "I attach the greatest importance." The subject? Building a 2,000-foot aircraft carrier out of ice. The plan was so classified that the men who worked on it weren't even told what they were building. What they discovered in the process would remain hidden from the public for decades. The year is 1942. The Battle of the Atlantic is a slaughter. German U-boats are sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they can be built. Over 800 vessels lost in a single year. Britain is starving. Convoys crossing the mid-Atlantic face a terrifying stretch where no air cover can reach them. Sailors call it the Black Pit. Hundreds of miles of open ocean where wolf packs hunt with absolute impunity. Churchill knows that if this gap isn't closed, Britain will fall, not from invasion, but from starvation. Enter Geoffrey Pyke, a man so eccentric that even his colleagues at Combined Operations Headquarters couldn't quite figure him out. A former journalist, escaped prisoner of war, and self-taught inventor, Pyke worked from a cluttered bed surrounded by towers of paper, rarely bathing, chain-smoking, and firing off radical memos at all hours of the night. Lord Mountbatten, head of Combined Operations, called him one of the most brilliant minds of the entire war. And Pyke had just conceived an idea so absurd that it bordered on genius. Pyke's proposal was elegantly insane. Instead of building aircraft carriers from precious steel, which consumed years and staggering resources, why not build them from ice? The Atlantic was already full of icebergs. Nature had proven that frozen water could survive at sea for months. But ordinary ice was brittle, unpredictable, and far too fragile for war. Pyke needed something dramatically stronger. And in a cramped laboratory across the Atlantic, 2 researchers were about to hand him exactly what he needed, a material that would change everything. In early 1943, researchers at Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute discovered something remarkable. Mixing water with just 14% wood pulp and freezing it created a composite material stronger than concrete. They called it Pykrete, after Geoffrey Pyke himself. It was extraordinarily slow to melt, could be shaped and cut like lumber, and most astonishingly, bullets couldn't penetrate it. A block of ordinary ice shattered on impact. A block of Pykrete, the bullet barely left a mark. This wasn't ice anymore. This was a building material engineered for war. Churchill was mesmerized. He personally championed the project, codenamed Habakkuk, named after the Old Testament prophet who wrote, "I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told." The irony was entirely deliberate. Even Churchill's own admirals thought this was madness. But Churchill didn't care about their skepticism. He gave the direct order, build a prototype, prove that it can be done. And what they envisioned next was staggering beyond anything the world had ever seen. The planned vessel defied comprehension. 2,000 feet long, over twice the length of the Titanic. A beam of 300 feet, walls of Pykrete 40 feet thick, displacement of nearly 2 million tons. It would carry a full airstrip, hangars for dozens of fighter aircraft, anti-aircraft batteries, and a crew of several thousand men. The hull would be essentially torpedo-proof. No conventional weapon on Earth could sink something this massive. It would be, quite literally, the unsinkable ship that the Titanic only pretended to be. But could anyone actually build it? In early 1943, construction began at Patricia Lake in the Canadian Rockies, near the remote town of Jasper, Alberta. A small team of conscientious objectors, men who had refused to fight but still desperately wanted to serve their country, was trucked deep into the freezing wilderness under absolute secrecy. They weren't even told what they were building. Working through the brutal Canadian winter at temperatures plunging far below zero, they constructed a 60-foot prototype vessel using massive blocks of Pykrete reinforced with timber frames and fitted with a single 1-horsepower refrigeration unit to keep the entire structure frozen. Against all odds, the prototype floated. It held together beautifully, and the engineers monitoring it could barely contain their excitement. But the real test hadn't even started. The Patricia Lake prototype survived through the spring thaw and deep into the scorching summer of 1943, defying every skeptic who said it couldn't be done. Even as temperatures climbed well above freezing and the surrounding ice on the lake melted completely away, the small refrigeration system kept the Pykrete solid and intact. The structure didn't crack. It didn't buckle or warp. It floated serenely on the surface of that glacial mountain lake like a quiet monument to impossible engineering. Detailed reports were dispatched back to London, and Churchill was elated. He finally had his proof of concept. The next step was securing American support, because building the full-scale Habakkuk would require industrial resources that only the United States could provide. And everything now hinged on a single meeting. Roosevelt was reportedly fascinated. The Americans agreed to explore the project immediately, and joint Anglo-American engineering teams were assembled to begin drafting detailed construction blueprints. The full-scale Habakkuk would be manufactured in a remote corner of the North Atlantic, assembled from enormous prefabricated Pykrete blocks produced on both sides of the ocean and shipped to the construction site. The project would require 35,000 tons of wood pulp, a fleet of specialized refrigeration barges, and an estimated construction window of 8 months. The projected cost was $70 million, a mere fraction of what a conventional steel carrier fleet would demand. On paper, Habakkuk looked like a genuine war-winning masterstroke. But behind the optimism, a quiet crisis was already building that would destroy everything. The engineers quickly discovered problems that no calm-water prototype on a mountain lake could ever reveal. Keeping 2 million tons of Pykrete frozen in the open North Atlantic required a refrigeration system of mind-bending complexity, an intricate network of cooling pipes running through literally miles of frozen hull, consuming enormous quantities of energy that would need its own dedicated power plant. The wood pulp supply alone would divert critical resources from ammunition and aircraft production. And perhaps most damning of all, the construction timeline was slipping badly. Every month of delay brought devastating advances in conventional technology. Long-range B-24 Liberator bombers were finally closing the mid-Atlantic gap on their own. Escort carriers, small, fast, and cheap, were rolling off American shipyards at an unprecedented pace. The Black Pit was shrinking, without any ice ship at all. By late 1943, the very crisis Habakkuk was designed to solve was being solved by other means entirely. The U-boat menace was broken. The mid-Atlantic air gap was finally closed. Allied shipping losses plummeted. And suddenly, the most ambitious engineering project of the entire Second World War had no enemy left to fight. In December 1943, the British Admiralty did what bureaucracies do best. They made it disappear. No public announcement. No press conference. No ceremony. A file folder stamped "Cancelled" in red ink was placed into a drawer at Combined Operations Headquarters, and that drawer was pushed shut. The dream of the unsinkable ice aircraft carrier, a vessel that would have dwarfed every ship ever built, was classified and buried deep in the sealed archives of wartime London, as if it had never existed at all. Most people don't know that the prototype built at Patricia Lake in Canada was simply left to sink, slowly dissolving back into the cold mountain water like a secret the Earth itself was swallowing. But while the project could be filed away and forgotten, Geoffrey Pyke could not. And what happened to the man who dreamed all of this into existence is perhaps the darkest chapter of this entire story. August 1943. The Quebec Conference at the Grand Chateau, Frontenac Hotel. Churchill, Roosevelt, and the entire combined Allied military command have gathered to plan the final stages of the war. Among the countless debates about D-Day logistics and the Pacific Theater, Lord Louis Mountbatten takes the floor for a demonstration that no one in that room will ever forget. He carries 2 blocks into the conference, one of ordinary ice, one of Pykrete. He draws his service revolver. He fires point-blank at the ice block. It explodes into fragments. Then he aims at the Pykrete and pulls the trigger. The bullet ricochets off the frozen surface and grazes the trouser leg of Admiral Ernest King, the commander of the entire United States Navy. The room goes absolutely silent. Mountbatten smiles. The Pykrete is bulletproof. But here's the thing that haunts you, if you sit with it long enough. Imagine it's the morning of December 15, 1943. A young Canadian engineer named Herman Gruber, one of the small teams stationed at Patricia Lake, walks down to the shoreline in the gray pre-dawn cold. He's just received the telegram. Project terminated. Effective immediately. He stands there, breath clouding in the mountain air, staring at the prototype bobbing gently in the still water. 60 feet long. 1,000 tons of frozen pulp and ice. He helped build it with his own hands through a brutal Alberta winter, watched it shrug off rifle rounds and small explosives like they were nothing. And now, nobody's coming. No fleet of ice carriers will ever darken the Atlantic horizon. No squadron of Spitfires will ever launch from a frozen runway 2,000 feet long. He later told a colleague something remarkable, that standing there, watching the refrigeration pipes still humming, still faithfully keeping the hull frozen as if the war still needed it, he felt like he was attending a funeral for a future that almost existed. And maybe that's the cruelest thing about Habakkuk. Not that it failed. It didn't fail. The engineering worked. The material was revolutionary. The concept was validated. What killed it wasn't impossibility, it was timing. 6 months earlier, and the Allied navies might have committed. 6 months later, and it wouldn't have even been proposed. Habakkuk fell into the one narrow crack in history where an idea can be simultaneously too radical to approve and too slow to matter. Ask yourself, how many world-changing inventions have fallen into that same crack? How many futures almost existed and didn't? But while the project could be filed away and forgotten, Geoffrey Pyke could not. And what happened to the man who dreamed all of this into existence is perhaps the darkest chapter of this entire story. Geoffrey Pyke never recovered. Plagued by severe depression and the crushing conviction that his genius had been squandered by a world that moved too slowly to see his vision, he took his own life with an overdose of sleeping pills in February 1948. He was 54 years old, but his creation outlasted him. But his creation refused to die, and what happened to it next is something most people have never heard. The prototype at Patricia Lake tells its own quiet, haunting story. When the refrigeration unit was finally switched off after the project's cancellation, the Pykrete structure took 3 full summers to melt completely, a testament to the extraordinary durability of the material even without active cooling. It finally slipped beneath the glacial waters in 1946 and settled on the lake bed 100 feet below the surface. For decades, it lay there forgotten, gathering silt and algae in the cold mountain darkness. Then in 1988, divers working for the Canadian government rediscovered the sunken remains and placed a commemorative brass plaque on the wreckage. Today, Patricia Lake is a popular recreational diving site in Jasper National Park. Tourists paddle canoes directly above the remnants of one of the most audacious military secrets of the entire war, most of them completely unaware of what rests beneath them. And perhaps that is the detail that lingers most. Not the ice, not the impossible engineering, not even Churchill's desperate gamble. It's the fact that the men who actually built the thing, who hauled timber and mixed sawdust and poured Pykrete in the brutal Canadian winter, were conscientious objectors. Men who refused to kill, still wanted to save lives. They built a weapon of war with the hands of pacifists, in a frozen lake at the edge of nowhere, for a project that would never see the ocean. And no one ever thanked them for it. Somewhere at the bottom of Patricia Lake, the bones of a frozen warship are still settling into the silt. A relic of the moment when the greatest empire on Earth was so desperate, so utterly cornered, that it turned to ice itself for salvation. They named the project after a prophet who spoke of things too extraordinary to believe. And 80 years later, it still is.